The message came on a quiet Thursday evening, short, polite, and completely unexpected. It was from my father. We hadn't spoken properly in over a year, not since the last time our conversation ended with silence instead of understanding. His text simply read, "We're having a special family celebration this weekend. It would mean a lot if you could come." For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, unsure how to feel. My heart stirred with something fragile, a mix of hope and fear. My father had never been the sentimental type. Growing up, affection from him was rare, measured, and always conditional. But a part of me still longed for his approval. Even after all these years, I reread the message, wondering if he had sent out a guilt or genuine care. Maybe this was his way of making peace, an attempt to bridge the distance between us. The thought warmed me, even as another voice inside whispered caution. I spent that night thinking about my childhood, about all the times I tried to earn his pride, the soccer games he never came to, the report cards he glanced at without a word, the birthdays where his gifts felt like afterthoughts. Yet, no matter how cold things had been, I never stopped hoping that one day he would see me, not as a disappointment, not as a burden, but as his child. When I finally replied, my fingers hesitated over the screen before typing, "I'll be there." The next few days passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. I stood in front of my closet, unsure what to wear, as though the right outfit might somehow make him proud. I even bought a small gift, something thoughtful, something that might say I care, even if he never did. On the drive back home, the memories grew heavier. The roads were familiar, yet they carried ghosts of laughter and arguments, of moments that could have been different if only love had been easier between us. Still, I convinced myself that maybe the celebration would change things. Maybe he wanted to start over, to finally welcome me back into the family not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. But deep down, a quiet ache warned me. Some invitations don't come from love. Some are sent only to remind you of where you no longer fit. The drive back home felt longer than it used to. Every mile seemed to peel back another layer of memory. Echoes of laughter from the back seat, arguments that ended in silence, and the sound of my father's voice calling my name, firm but distant. Home had once been a place filled with life. Now it existed more like a shadow in my mind, familiar, but no longer warm. When I finally turned onto our old street, everything looked smaller. The houses, the trees, even the sky. Time had touched everything except the ache inside me. I parked outside the house and sat there for a few minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. The lights were on, soft music drifted through the windows, and laughter spilled faintly into the night air. For a moment, I felt like a stranger standing outside someone else's happiness. When I finally knocked, it wasn't my father who answered. It was my stepmother, warm smile perfectly rehearsed. "You made it," she said brightly, though her eyes flickered with surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to actually come. She called out for my father. He appeared from the living room, dressed neatly, a glass in hand. "Good to see you," he said, his tone polite, almost businesslike. No hug, no warmth, just a brief handshake that felt more like an obligation than affection. Inside, the house looked different, newer furniture, updated photos on the walls. My half-siblings and cousins were in most of them, smiling at family vacations and birthdays I had never been invited to. My own face was nowhere to be found. I tried not to stare, but the absence said everything. As I walked through rooms, I felt like a guest, careful not to touch anything, careful not to linger. The air smelled of celebration, perfume, food, candles. Yet beneath it all was the faint scent of something else, distance. My father poured himself another drink, chatting easily with relatives who barely remember my name. When he finally turned back to me, he said, "It's good you could make it. It's been a while." "Yes," I replied quietly. "It has." He smiled, a small, polite curve of the lips, and moved on to greet someone else. I stood there in the center of my childhood home, surrounded by people who share my blood, but not my belonging. For years, I had imagined coming back to this place and finally feeling seen. Instead, I felt like a guest who had stayed too long at a party meant for someone else. The celebration was already in full swing by the time the evening light began to fade. The living room glowed with soft golden lamps. Laughter floated through the air, and the clinking of glasses echoed like music. Everywhere I looked, people were smiling, hugging, exchanging stories about their lives. It should have felt warm, comforting, but instead, it felt like watching a movie I was no longer part of. My father was at the center of it all, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, and basking in the attention like a man who had built the perfect life. He looked so at ease, surrounded by everyone but me. I hovered at the edge of conversations, nodding politely when someone asked, "So, what are you up to these days?" Their tone always carried that faint trace of curiosity mixed with pity. Dinner was soon announced, and the chatter turned into a joyful rush toward the long dining table, beautifully set with silverware and crystal glasses. My heart lifted a little. Maybe this was a chance to sit beside my father, to talk, to feel included again. I walked toward the table, scanning for a place to sit. Then I heard his voice, calm, casual, but cutting straight through me. "You can sit over there," he said, pointing with his glass toward the smaller table by the corner, the kids' table. For a moment, I thought he was joking. I looked at him, waiting for the smile that would tell me it was all in good fun. But he was already turning away, calling to someone else, as if the matter were settled. A few cousins giggled. One of them, barely 16, said, "Come on, sit with us." I smiled weakly, my chest tight, and walked over. The smaller table was crowded with laughter, spilling soda and half-told stories. They were good kids, innocent, carefree. But as I sat there, every sound from the main table echoed louder. My father's booming laugh, the clinking of wine glasses, the easy conversations I wasn't part of. I tried to eat, but the food turned to sand in my mouth. My eyes wandered toward the adult table. My siblings, my father, his wife, all so comfortable together, as if I were some distant relative tagging along. Someone made a toast, and the room filled with cheers. I raised my glass halfway, but didn't drink. Inside, something fragile began to crack. That night, surrounded by the noise of family, I had never felt more alone. The seat my father chose for me wasn't just at a different table. It was in a different world. As dinner went on, the laughter from the main table grew louder, almost echoing against my chest. Every burst of amusement from my father's voice hit me like a reminder where I stood, close enough to hear, but too far to belong. I kept my eyes on my plate, pushing food around just to look busy. The younger cousins chatted easily beside me, their carefree voices a blur. They talked about school, about new phones, about who liked who. I tried to smile, to blend in, but inside I was drowning. I wasn't angry at them. They were just kids. I was angry at the man who decided this was where I belonged. When my father stood to give a toast, the room hushed. He raised his glass high, a proud smile on his face. "To family," he said warmly. "To love and to being together." His words were met with applause and cheers. But to me, they sounded hollow, a performance meant for everyone else, not me. I glanced up and saw his eyes sweep across the table. They skipped over me. Not once did he meet my gaze. It was then that something inside me broke. Not suddenly, but quietly, like a string pulled too tight for too long finally snapping. The sound of laughter became unbearable, a painful reminder what I'd always wanted but never received. One of my younger cousins leaned toward me, whispering, "Why are you sitting here? Shouldn't you be with the grown-ups?" I forced a small smile. "Apparently not," I said softly. For a second, her innocent confusion mirrored the truth I had refused to face all these years. I had never really been part of this family, at least not in the way I'd hoped. I stood up, mumbling something about needing fresh air. No one stopped me. No one even noticed. I slipped through the back door into the cool night, where the air was sharp and quiet. The laughter inside faded into a dull hum behind the walls. I leaned against the railing, staring at the stars above the old house, the same stars I used to look at as a child when I felt alone. Only now, the loneliness was heavier, older, harder to escape. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. There was only a hollow ache, a realization that the love I'd been chasing for years might never exist in the way I needed it to. For the first time, I wonder if I'd come not to reconnect, but to confirm a truth I already knew. And now that I had it, it hurt more than I could ever have imagined. The celebration had quieted down by the time I went back inside. Most of the guests had already left, their laughter lingering faintly in the air like smoke after a fire. Empty glasses cluttered the tables, and the scent of food had grown heavy and stale. My father stood near the fireplace, talking with one of his friends, his voice still loud, still sure of itself. I paused at the doorway, watching him, the man who had shaped so much of my life without even realizing it. He looked content, almost proud of how perfectly the evening had gone. I wonder if he even remembered sending me to the kids' table, if he saw the humiliation written on my face. Probably not. When his friend left, I walked toward him. My heart thudded in my chest, my palms damp. He looked up, surprised to see me still there. "You didn't leave already?" he asked lightly, pouring himself another drink. "No," I said quietly. "Not yet." There was a pause, one of those thick silences that carry too much history. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked, as if the night had been flawless. I let out a small, shaky laugh. "Enjoy myself?" I repeated. "You made me sit at the kids' table, Dad." He frowned, confused by my tone. "It was just a seat," he said dismissively. "Don't be so sensitive." The words hit harder than I expected. My voice rose, trembling. "It wasn't just a seat. You humiliated me. Again. You invited me here, made me believe you wanted me to be part of this, and then you shoved me into a corner like I didn't matter." His eyes narrowed. "You're overreacting," he said sharply. "You've always been dramatic." I took a step closer. "Do you even hear yourself? I've spent my whole life trying to earn a place at your table. Every time I thought maybe I'd done enough, you reminded me that I hadn't." For a moment, his expression shifted, the mask slipping just enough to reveal something that might have been guilt, or maybe just discomfort. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I didn't mean anything by it," he muttered finally, his tone softer. "You're reading too much into things." I nodded slowly, feeling the last of my hope drain away. "No," I said quietly. "I'm just finally seeing things for what they are." I turned before he could reply. Behind me, I heard him sigh, not out of regret, but annoyance. It didn't matter anymore. The words I wanted to say my entire life had finally left my mouth. And even though it broke me, it also set something inside me free. The house was silent when I walked upstairs to the guest room. The muffled sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen and the low hum of distant conversation floated up from below, but all felt far away, like a world I no longer belonged to. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my packed bag in the corner. I had unpacked only one shirt earlier, still folded neatly on the chair. I realized, with a strange sense of calm, that there was nothing here I wanted to unpack anymore. The confrontation replayed in my mind, every word, every glance, every hollow denial. I had gone there hoping for something simple, something human, acknowledgement, maybe even a fragment of love. Instead, I'd been reminded once again of where I stood. On the outside, always on the outside. I took a deep breath and looked around the room. The walls were bare, the furniture impersonal, like a hotel. This wasn't home. It hadn't been for a long time. I reached for my phone and typed a message I had written in my head 100 times before, but never had the courage to send. I came tonight because I wanted to feel like part of this family again. But I realize now that belonging doesn't come from an invitation. It comes from love, and that's something you've never been willing to give. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Please don't call. I need time to heal. I read it twice before hitting send. My hands trembled slightly, but the moment I pressed a button, I felt something lift, like setting down a weight I had been carrying for years. Downstairs, laughter started again, softer now, almost ghostly. It no longer hurt the way it had earlier. It just sounded distant. I zipped my bag and sat quietly for a while, listening to the night. The moonlight spilled to the curtains, gentle and pale, and for the first time, I didn't feel the desperate need to prove myself. I didn't feel small. I just felt done. Before going to sleep, I looked out the window at the house I had once called home. I thought about the child I used to be, the one who waited by the window for his father to come home, believing that love could be earned through good grades, patience, and silence. I whispered to that version of myself, "You can stop trying now." It didn't feel like running away. It felt like finally walking in the right direction. Morning came quietly, with soft light spilling through the curtains and painting the room in shades of gold. I woke before anyone else. The house was still, the silence only broken by the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that often comes after storm, fragile but honest. I moved quietly, careful not to wake anyone. My bag was already packed, my decision already made. When I stepped into the hallway, the smell of last night's celebration still lingered, perfumed food and something faintly bittersweet. I glanced toward my father's study as I passed. The door was slightly open. Inside, he was asleep in his chair, an empty glass on the desk beside him. For a moment, I just stood there, watching him. I didn't feel anger anymore, only a deep, quiet sadness, the kind that comes when you finally accept something you can't change. I wanted to wake him, to say goodbye, but I knew it wouldn't matter. We were two people connected by blood, but separated by everything else. Outside, the air was crisp and cold. The morning sun felt gentle on my face as I walked toward my car. Each step away from that house felt like shedding another layer of the person I used to be. The child who craved approval, the teenager who begged to be seen, the adult who kept waiting for a love that would never come. As I drove away, I didn't look back, not out of bitterness, but because I finally understood something important. You can't force someone to see your worth. You can only choose to stop proving it. Back in my apartment that evening, the city lights blinked softly outside my window. I sat in the quiet, drinking tea, listening to the hum of life beyond the glass. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like freedom. I thought about the word family, how people often define it by blood, by name, by history. But real family, I realized, isn't always the one you're born into. It's the people who choose you, who see you, who sit beside you without conditions. That night, I opened a new journal and wrote the first line on a blank page. I don't belong where I'm tolerated. I belong where I'm valued. It wasn't a statement of anger. It was a promise, to myself, to my future, to the person I had finally become. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for my father to see me. I had finally seen myself.